This message was recorded at the Billy Graham Training Center at the Cove in Asheville, North Carolina. Through the ministry of the Cove, we're training people in God's Word to win others to Christ. It's our goal to develop Christians who experience God through knowing Him better, knowing His Word, building godly relationships, and helping others know Him. We trust that this message will strengthen your walk with God and help you experience Him right where you are.
Jesus died due to crucifixion. This is both the first of the 12, and it's in green. Therefore, it is one of the minimal facts. Half the facts are minimal facts. This is one of them. Let me talk a little bit about crucifixion, because I'm not sure how much it'll come up in here, because I was telling you before, the big place it will come up is in discussing what's called the swoon theory or the apparent death theory. Let me just give you a couple of reasons why we know Jesus died by crucifixion. Something just happened last night after I got back to my the cabin, and my teaching assistant, who has a PhD and did both his master's and doctoral dissertations on the resurrection, so he's going to be an up-and-coming Mike Lacona. They know each other really well. This guy's only 35, and Mike's getting really, really old. I mean, he's 10 years younger than I am, but he's getting really, really old. And so he's really happy for Ben Shaw. And Ben's already got 20 publications, and he's 35, so he's a brilliant young guy. Ben and I and a student from Texas Tech who already has a PhD in biochemistry or something like that from the medical school, and he's finishing his finishing his MD. We did an article together on Jesus' death by crucifixion. It's probably on my website. There's a lot of things on the website, and again, I have guys doing each of them, so I don't do it myself. You might be able to find it there, but it was published by the Baylor University Medical School Journal. Well, guess what happened? Last night, a publication appeared in the Linacre Quarterly, which is one of the most prestigious medical journals in the world, responding to our article and objecting to what we were saying. So that's cool. And I'll tell you where it is. We decide it's the first reason you know Jesus died on the cross. By far, the predominant medical opinion is that Jesus died due to asphyxiation. He died due to asphyxiation. But a lot of medical doctors think that can't happen just like that. But I'm not commenting about the guys who wrote the article in this prestigious deal. I didn't read it yet. But I've gotten other letters from medical doctors who think it's not true. I can just, that theory, asphyxiation, is not true. But we produce a chart where there are something like 35 medical doctors who've taken a stance for asphyxiation. And about the next 5 most popular theories as to why Jesus died, you can double the rest of the options, and you'll only get to the number who take asphyxiation. Asphyxiation is far more common by far more specialist medical doctors, but they're free to disagree. Let me tell you how we think it's asphyxiation and why that is real convenient to know that Jesus died. Because some critics will say things like this: oh, so I suppose you think a Roman centurion is probably got his medical degree from Johns Hopkins or something like that, right? And they probably plugged the EKG and the EEG in one of the rocks out there on Golgotha. I mean, what's wrong with you? Why would you think that because a soldier thinks somebody's dead, the guy's got to be irreversibly dead? And that's the way they'll often pose the apparent death theory, that maybe Jesus didn't really die. And of course, he really didn't die, he didn't rise. So I'll give you 3 reasons here real briefly. Asphyxiation, in a lot of experiments, and there have been literal experiments, and maybe some of them, well, not maybe, some of them are not experiments. Even in modern times, people have been crucified. And you can get the data from people who've been crucified. They've been written up. Even in World War II, there were a bunch of cases. I have photographs of some of the doctors who've asked for male volunteers, and they would, now these are a little bit different. There was nothing to rest their feet on, and that does make a difference, but they were tied, never nailed, obviously, they're volunteers, tied to a 2x4 extended from the ceiling, and they measured their heartbeat and their respiration, blood pressure and everything. And these fellas lost consciousness in a maximum of 12 minutes. When your body hangs that way, and one of the guys who did it was a radiologist. The photo I have is him watching the guy's lungs while he's up there. I mean, that's a medical experiment. And they say what happens is the weight of the body pulls down, and the muscles you work on in the gym, chest muscles, the intercostal, pectoral, deltoid muscles, especially if yours are well-developed people in that world. I mean, this is a big if, but if the man in the shroud is Jesus, and I'm not going to argue it is on Friday, but if the man in the shroud is Jesus, it well could be, he's in good shape. He's in good shape. He's has a well-defined body, and that works against you in crucifixion, because the muscles, when you're crucified, the weight of your body pulls down on them, and they can constrict the lungs. And as I said, these guys were passing out in 12 minutes. Now, if they could have pushed up on something, it'd be extremely painful if you had nails in your feet. But if you could push up, what happens is the person slumps down, they begin asphyxiating, can't breathe. What happens is you can inhale. It's like an asthmatic. I've got asthma. It's like an asthmatic. They can inhale, but they can't exhale. That's what happens. And, if you can inhale but not exhale, it's not any better than not being able to inhale either, because it won't last but a few seconds. So you hang like this, and they began having constriction in their air passages. And so what you do on the cross is you push up. But if you've seen The Passion, the movie, when you push up, that's extremely painful to push up on these feet, but you've got to breathe. And when you push up, you gulp air. And if you're going to talk, like from the cross, to curse somebody out or to say something nice like Jesus did, if you're going to say things, you have to be in the up position to exhale. I'm not saying nobody could ever do it down here. You might be able to force something out, but you basically have to exhale to speak. And so they push up just to breathe, can't stand the pain in their feet, go back down, and this could go on for days. So, but most of us know these guys who didn't have their feet done, if your life depends on doing pull-ups, you're not living very long. None of us are living very long if you're doing pull-ups. And that's what it would be like if nothing was holding your feet. But it helps to actually have the nails in your feet because you can push up. It's just that it's extremely painful, not to mention the whipping. So here's how the centurion, on this theory, here's how the centurion would know without having a medical degree. If the guy is hanging low on the cross and haven't pushed up for maybe a half hour, you're dead. You cannot fake not breathing. It's like the guy, someone's trying to drown me. Well, that's okay. I'll hold my breath for 10 minutes and hope they don't notice that I'm not dead. No, you're dead. You can't do that. And so the centurion, don't forget, these folks are soldiers. They don't know anatomy. Anatomy is a long way off, largely done in Italy, Padua, and other universities in the late Middle Ages and beginning of the Renaissance. They wouldn't know organs, but soldiers would know where to stab to drop somebody the fastest. They might not know what they're stabbing, but they know where to stab to get it done quickly. Now, that'll be relevant in a minute. But if you're hanging low for any amount of time, and the centurion looks up there and he's a pro at this, in Jerusalem, they crucified so many people when Jerusalem fell in 70 AD. They crucified so many people, Josephus said they ran out of wood. And you want to hear something else? I'm saying some gory things here, but just remember this is our Lord too. They crucified women and children too. Now, it was more rare, but they crucified women and children. And so I'm just saying that centurions know this stuff. They know what's going on. They don't need a stethoscope. They see you hanging down for a long time, and you're gone. So if it's asphyxiation, I'd say that's indication number one that this fact is true. Okay, two more. In John, only in John, so some critics don't like it. John's the latest gospel, nobody else says it, but I'll tell you why it makes good sense to say it in a second. They said they came to the two men on each side of Jesus and they broke the ankles. Now, all of you hanging in there on this explanation, if they break your ankles, you're not pushing up. And they didn't break your ankles nicely, they smashed them. They used a large mallet, like think sledgehammer, or an axe. You're not pushing up. If you don't push up, you're not breathing. You're not breathing, you're dying. That's why they broke ankles. And one of the sources about Jesus, it's really amazing. One of these sources, it says, I think it might be Peter. It might be the Gospel of Peter. Remember I told you it was goofy, the real tall angels, and Jesus was even taller, and he came out on the angel's shoulders. Remember all that? One of them says, one of the Romans said, let's make this guy suffer. Don't break his ankles. Well, that's just an interesting reference. Breaking the ankles is horrible, but it ends the suffering. It's like a mercy killing. Ends the pain. But the guy says, not historical, but the guy says, don't break his ankles, make him hurt. There's another source that says when they killed Andrew, the apostle, when they killed Andrew, traditionally on an X-shaped cross, so he stretched out like this, the guy also said, don't break his ankles so he dies slowly. So it's like every variety of this you can think of. Now, a lot of, as I just said, the article, I haven't read it yet, but the medical article, it was kind of aimed at us, saying it's not by asphyxiation. It's not us. We weren't telling, even though we have the medical guy on our 3-person team from Texas Tech, it wasn't we weren't arguing, we didn't say why it had to be asphyxiation. We did a medical head count. That's what we were doing. And there's like 27 asphyxiation views, and no other view has more than like 3. And so we just have a chart there with a bunch of names in the Baylor Medical Journal. It may not be asphyxiation, but that's a medical, and any other view they take, I'll tell you, any other view is going to have issues. But asphyxiation makes the most sense to a lot of people. And one of the writers, one of the guys we cited, a Christian, very committed Christian, but he's a surgeon. And he wrote a book on this. And he said, whenever people talk about asphyxiation, they think that means you can't breathe. And it does mean that. But he said, think of another kind of asphyxiation, what he thinks was present on the cross. He says, your cells have to have oxygen to live. Through your whole body, your cells have to have oxygen. And when you're in tough situations of oxygen depletion, another kind of asphyxiation is if your body cells don't get oxygen. That's another way to die without gulping for air and your lungs not working. So it's still called asphyxiation. And you know what, I don't want to be super critical, but the guys write this article in this major medical journal. It's one of the top 5 medical journals in the world, the Linacre Quarterly. And the title on their article is, Did Jesus Die by Suffocation? For medical guys who are trying to correct us, and they can correct us, it doesn't bother me at all, but the word is not suffocation. The word is, there's a lot of difference between suffocation and asphyxiation. And for the cross, for what happens externally, suffocation is like when someone puts a pillow over your face and keeps it on. But in asphyxiation, you're free to breathe, but you can't. And here's this medical article that's going to correct us, which is absolutely fine. I really mean that. It rolls off me like nothing. But they use the word as suffocation, which is not the correct medical term. And they're all medical doctors. I'm thinking, if you're going to criticize somebody, get it right. But that's number one. In fact, I could tell you guys a quick story. Several of you have talked to me about Lee Strobel's book, The Case for Christ, and I'm the one they interviewed for Resurrection. I think they interviewed Bill Craig for Empty Tomb and J.P. Moreland for Things the Resurrection Means. But they had a medical doctor there. His name is Metherell. Very sharp guy. He's got an MD and a PhD in medicine. And they sent us the manuscript before the book came out, and Metherell used the word suffocation. And I wrote back to Lee and I said, hey, I'm out of my lane, but I think this word should be asphyxiation. And he told the doctor said, my bad, and he changed the word to asphyxiation. But the new article says suffocation. Anyway, enough. But I think that's the majority view, that he died by, well, it is the majority view, but it may not be the right view, that he died by asphyxiation. If he did, and the centurion sees him lying down, that's as good as being in the morgue or using a stethoscope or doing an EKG or an EEG. You just can't be in that position and breathe, according to this position. You might be there for 5 minutes, but not for 30 minutes. Okay, here's second reason. They came to the men on each side and broke their ankles, and they didn't break Jesus' ankles. But here's the point. They did do death blows to make sure. So the first thing is, yeah, he's been hanging there for 30 minutes. I kind of think he's dead. Well, boys, make sure they smash the ankles. Okay, so proof upon proof that the person's dead. Well, they already saw that Jesus was dead. How did they know? Because he was hanging low on the cross. So they stabbed him in the side with a spear, and blood and water comes out. Now, critics aren't crazy about this because, again, it's only in John, and John's the latest one. But some of the top New Testament scholars in the world, not evangelicals, some of the top evangelical scholars in the world say they think this passage in John is true. And there's more than one reason, but the main one is this. We now have a Roman source, a Roman non-Christian source, where in the writing, the author's name is Quintilian, Q-U-I-N. Someone's going to come up and ask me how to spell it. I've gotten a lot of those this week. Q-U-I-N-T-I-L-L-I-A-N, Quintilian. And this Roman writer says, when they crucified bodies and a family member wanted the corpse so they could give a person a decent burial. See, footnote, Josephus says, even if they were killed for a crime, Jews still believe bodies should be buried because they take bodies seriously. And of course, a family member might very well want a broken body too, but of a son or a husband or something. And Quintilian says, when the family member comes and asks for the body, the centurion takes the body, the person's already dead, takes the body down, and once they pierce the corpse, they give the family the body. And the word pierce is Latin. Quintilian's written in Latin, and the word percussus in Latin that they use for the wound, probably the most prominent writer who writes on this today says that word percussus is a military term, and it almost always means to strike with a spear, a sword, or an axe. And you know they're not chopping at your knee. They're trying to make sure you're dead. And so traditionally, Jesus is stabbed in the upper chest right here. And blood and water comes out. Now, that's actually a third reason for what's going to be a fourth, but a third one here, that the blood and water is a pretty clear indication that he was dead. There's about a half dozen reasons to believe Jesus was dead. And even if he's not the man buried in the shroud, even if it's not Jesus' shroud, but it's some other poor crucifixion victim, there's also blood and water coming out of his chest wound right here. And the blood and water indicates a separation of blood and serum, indicates cell death, and also it's an indication that the spear went through one of two places or both. If a person's severely beaten enough, the chest, you have a situation where the chest fills with blood and it kind of crushes the lungs and you can't breathe. But it builds up. Drawings will show you that there's half blood and half fluid that builds up in the lungs. You can get all kinds of medical reports on this. And so the water may have come from the from the lung. But it means the guy's dead. But the most popular option is that around the heart, there's a sac, and it's called the pericardium. It's a very thin sac, and there's a few cc's of liquid. But when you suffer intensely, physically, the cc's, the liquid grows, and the thought is the spear went through the chest and into the heart. It can't stop in the pericardium. That's like saying there's a balloon filled with water, and outside of it is it's encased in a piece of paper. If the spear is in the piece of paper, it's not broken, but it's gone into the balloon. You can't stop inside let's say 5 sheets of paper together. I mean, but it's a sack. There's nothing behind. It's not even as strong as paper. And so the thought is it went through either the lung and stopped, more likely into the pericardium, which means into the heart. And this blow shows he's dead. Percussus, striking a cadaver with an axe, a sword, or a spear. The third reason, I haven't even told you why, actually this would be 4 if you want to count them: asphyxiation, spear wound, the separation of blood and water, that's 3. If you want to count that 1 for 2, that he was both stabbed and what happened when he was stabbed. But I haven't given you yet the unanimous reason why critics, even atheists, don't question Jesus' death by crucifixion. Almost never in the literature. Haven't given you the main reason yet. Isn't that amazing? You can get through these 3 medical reasons. The 4th one's quasi-medical. And it's a logical problem. Now, let me tell you real briefly about the guy who thought this thing up. He is, in German liberalism, goes from 1799 till about 1920. German liberalism was a period where theology is mostly more liberal than it is today, especially as it is at present. Theology today is going back to the right because of all the data we have. And I got something else to share with you later in the week about the reliability. We're doing the minimal facts. The point of the minimal facts is to say, hey, even if you're not sure how much is true in the New Testament, if you know these 6, you got the resurrection. But the one later says, hey, you can be sure about what's in the New Testament. So it's a reliability argument. The more reliable the Gospels are, the stronger this argument becomes. So we do reliability early in the week. But minimal facts is a species of reliability argument, but it only does 6 facts. It's minimal. It takes few data. Well, in the age of liberalism, where they're more liberal than they are today, just about the most liberal guy in the German liberal movement was a guy named David Strauss. He's infamous. In fact, he wrote a life of Jesus in 1835 that was so liberal. He taught at the University of Tübingen, which still exists today. We were in Germany lecturing a few years ago, and we went right by the off-ramp. We were on a train. European trains are fantastic. They're just great to be on. And here's this exit, and you could have gone up to Tübingen. And I wished I could have gone there because it's probably the most famous of the old German universities. And it's usually pretty liberal. Today it's more conservative. It was liberal there. He taught it at Tübingen, and his life of Jesus was so liberal they kicked him out of the university. And they pensioned him off for life. Well, that just made him mad, and he started going downhill. And when he died in the early 1870s, he had given up belief in God and given up a belief in the afterlife. Now, most liberals, they're German, if you're into philosophy, they're German idealists. Idealists generally believe in God and an afterlife. They just take an unorthodox view. But he was a German idealist philosophically, but he gave up their 2 major tenets, is what I'm saying. No more God, no more afterlife, and he died in despair. It's a really, really sad story. But he writes this in 1835, and he takes some shots at this. But he did the full-blown one in 1864, and it was called The Life of Jesus for the German People. And here's his critique. It's called the Strauss critique, and it is very, very thoughtful. And most people just say, yeah, ever since Strauss, you can't question the resurrection. They don't even do everything else I've done. Here's Strauss. Strauss says, let's just say he was crucified and he didn't die. Now, I'm doing this. much more detail. Strauss does it in about 2 paragraphs. Let's just say he died. Let's just say he was crucified, but he didn't die. They take him down. He's either faking it. It makes no difference if he's faking it, if he's passed out, if he's in a coma. Makes no difference. He's been crucified. They put him in the tomb. What shape is he going to be a day and a half by our calendar? What shape is he going to be in a day and a half later on Sunday morning? We used to have a phrase in the 60s. Some of you it probably went later in the 60s. Maybe some of you have heard it. When people look really ragged, we used to have a saying that goes, man, you look like death warmed over. Do you remember that phrase? I see a lot of yeses. Jesus would look like death warmed over. And this is Strauss's point. He's not dead, but he's severely beaten up. Look at the movie, The Passion of the Christ. And what if they never crucified him? He was just beat up. What shape would he be in? Death warmed over. And Strauss says, okay, let's say he didn't die. But on Sunday morning, he decides to take a walk. As one writer says, he's going to tiptoe through the tulips. Remember he was buried in a garden? Tiptoe through the tulips and walk to where the disciples are. How far are they? I don't know. Maybe they're a quarter mile, 1 trip around the high school track. So he's going to walk. Oh, we got a problem. He's got to roll a stone back. No big deal. Rolls a stone back. Took several people to put it in front. Hey, I can do it. I'm a man, right? He's severely limited. Roll the stone back, tiptoe through the tulips, walk through the city, go where the disciples are. And when he gets there, remember the disciples were hiding for fear of the Jews? And when he opened the door, what did he look like? He didn't take a shower. His hair is straggly and blood-caked. He's opened his side again. For you hunters, he could easily have been tracked back to the tomb easier than you can track a deer in the woods, a wounded deer. He looks horrible. And the joke is, Andrew over in the corner, or somebody's going to say, oh boy, he's risen from the dead. That's just the definition of risen. Thank you, I'll keep my present body even if I have to die. And then Peter would be screaming instructions. Get a bowl of water, get this, someone go find a doctor, do this, do this, do this, do this. And then maybe he dies 5 days later. Let's say he doesn't die 5 days later. Strauss's point is, here's the logic of the situation. It makes no sense logically. And this is why. The disciples would probably thank the Lord for saving him. You know how we think you can be saved? Lord can answer prayer either through a doctor, through antibiotics, or for nothing at all. God can use all that. Medicine is used in the New Testament for healing too. The Good Samaritan, for example. So God can use medicine. God can work without medicine. So they would have probably have said, God gave us a great blessing by raising him from the dead. By keeping him alive. He's alive, but he's not raised. That would be your conclusion, says Strauss. Alive, but not raised. And he says they would never have gotten the idea that this should be preached because he's the prince of death, the prince of life, actually the prince of death. He'd be the prince of life and seated on the right hand of God and all these wonderful things. I can see it. Just look at him. He's ready to be sitting on the right hand of God. It's like, what kind of logic is that? So Strauss's view in a sentence would be, death warmed over does not equal eternal life. And Jesus is alive, but he's not raised. See, the problem is with the swoon theory, they don't think far enough when they make, maybe he didn't die on the cross. Great, well, you just blew your theory. Because even if he didn't die on the cross, you wouldn't get resurrection. But critics are unanimous that even the atheists are unanimous, the atheist scholars are unanimous that they thought they saw the risen Jesus. Seeing Strauss's Jesus is not seeing the risen Jesus. And that to this day, he wrote that, 175 years ago. And even today, critics will say, nah, swoon theory's stupid. Strauss, a little play on words, but Strauss killed the swoon theory. And he's famous for it. So take a pass on asphyxiation, take a pass on percussus and the spear wound, take a pass on blood and water. Just to see him in that shape, I'm done with this theory. And nobody takes it. So all that, I'm not going to be stopping that on the 12 facts like that, but I wanted to do it because I was afraid I'd get to the end of the week and we didn't get a chance to put this in. It's very important. Okay. Yes, okay. Jesus was buried. Now notice I make this very generic. I do this on purpose. By far, most scholars think Jesus was put in a cave. By far. But there's a few guys who want to get so far, critics, who want to get so far away from the resurrection that they say he was thrown into a rectangular grave in the dirt, as most were, or they say he might have been thrown into the trash heap, Gehenna, thrown into outside Jerusalem is where they burn garbage. They throw dead dogs and bodies and vagrants and whoever dies, and it just stunk like everything outside Jerusalem. And some people say they threw him in there. I just say buried, because thrown into a fire or buried in the dirt or put in the cave are all buried. So I'm just not trying to differentiate at this point. I'm making it real easy on myself not to have to do this, because nothing depends on the way he was buried. But he was buried, according to just anybody. Jesus' death caused his disciples to despair and lose hope. We often call the day after crucifixion Black Saturday. It was a day of depression. Remember, the disciples were hiding for fear of the Jews. That's not fun. And these are the guys who left their fishing, left their tax collecting, left their lines of work in some cases. We know Jesus went back to Peter's house. Remember, he healed his sick mother-in-law. So they did get to see their wives and family periodically, possibly. Maybe someone went for 3 years and didn't. But they left their families, they left their businesses. You know, James and John left their father Zebedee in the boat. I said fishing business, because they had servants doing it with them too. So they had hired help for the fishing business. And all of a sudden it was ripped from them. And when Jesus said, hey, I'm going to Jerusalem, I'm going to die, Peter says, no way, I'm going to die with you. So Saturday's a really bad day. You're reevaluating your life and think you wasted 3 years. And they had to come back from that. All right. This is one of the 12, not one of the 6 minimal facts. But I told you all week I want to do 6 plus 1. You'll see after the empty tomb argument why this could be a minimal fact, but I'll make it clear why it's not. Although it's not as widely accepted, a majority of scholars still hold that Jesus' burial tomb was discovered to be empty just a few days later. Okay, so this is one of the 12, not one of the 6. But it's as evidenced as well as any of the minimal facts. That's why we say plus 1. It has as much evidence as any of the minimal facts. But the other thing we look for in the minimal facts is scholarly acceptance. It has to be virtually unanimous among scholars. That doesn't make it true, but that makes it a good starting point. And this one isn't quite as unanimous. Well, I'll save the reason for when we do the empty tomb, but there's been a change in empty tomb studies and more scholars have gotten on board. This is the number 1 fact, and the minimal facts. It's green, so it's one of the 6. The disciples had actual experiences that they thought were literal appearances of the risen Jesus. This killed Strauss. Or I should say Strauss kills this, if Strauss is true. But all the critics, if all the critics think 5 is right, all of them, atheistic New Testament, the key word is scholars, not the guys living with their parents. The reason I keep taking the shot at these guys, many times they call themselves the ones that live in their parents' basement. They've never been to school. They don't have degrees. If they do, they're in journalism or something. I mean, they're off the subject. And they claim sometimes, this is just so bold, it's silly. They often claim to be experts in ancient languages. Yeah, I read Greek and Hebrew. baloney you do. Never study with anybody. They call themselves ancient historians. Wow. That must have been a really good Wikipedia article. And you know, sometimes you have to do this. I've been in debates where I do that. When they get real cocky and do that stuff, I say, was Wikipedia good this morning? Because that's what the surveys say. But they call themselves scholars. And after a while, and so often they're super angry. It's like, get a life, dude. Start by getting a life and then come back and talk to me, okay? Just calm down. You need something for anxiety and depression. It's really sad, but that's what I mean when I say scholars. And these scholars can be brats too, but at least they're scholars. They've gone to school, they've got the degrees in the relevant field. And by the way, the relevant fields would be Old Testament. Old Testament's still fine because you understand the text questions. Old Testament, New Testament, classics, ancient historians, someone of the few people who have doctor's degrees in archaeology, philosophy. These are relevant fields in the ancient world, but not, I'm pretty smart, I have a PhD. This is not me. I'm just saying if someone goes, I'm pretty smart, I've got a PhD in aerospace engineering. Well, you're a pretty smart guy, but not on this. I don't tell you what planes are made of. We spent our weekend coming up here. I spoke at a church coming up to the Cove this weekend, and the people who had us in their home, the guy's a retired F-16 fighter pilot. Just an awesome, awesome guy. And I wouldn't instruct him about planes. I wouldn't want him to tell me about, what goes on up here. He's good, though. He's studying it on his own. He's making progress. But understand the strength of this point. If the disciples had real experiences that they thought were appearances of the risen Jesus, they all thought he was raised, Strauss wins and swoon dies. Does that make sense to you? The Jesus who comes the death-warmed over Jesus would not have this effect on him, and everybody thinks he had this effect on them. So the surviving cross Jesus is not true. Another minimal fact. In fact, we got some right here in a row. The disciples were subsequently transformed from doubters who were scared of their own shadow. I'm not making fun of them. That's that phrase again, hiding for fear of the Jews. To bold proclaimers of his death. And when they were threatened with death, they said, do your own thing. Do it. I'm not trying to die. When I'm doing the minimal facts, here's what, just a caution. You cannot say, if you want to do it historically, you can't quit saying that the disciples were transformed and they all died as martyrs. We don't know that. First of all, we don't even have all of them, no matter how the sources, what you count. But most of them are late. They're too late to use as history. Like Eusebius reports a few. He's a church historian who's writing about 325 AD. Subtract the 25 for the 30 of the cross, and it's 300 years after the fact. That's too late. Now notice I'm being hard on the early historians, but that's the earliest biography for Alexander the Great, 300 years. But Eusebius is too late. And they'll give the death of a few of them. Now, we are sure of a few of their martyrdoms. The ones we're sure of, in case I don't get to this some other time, the ones we're sure of are Paul, Peter, and James, the brother of Jesus. We have first century sources for their martyrdom, and they're not always Christian. Josephus is the one that tells us that James was stoned. And we have another source too. A guy named Hegesippus. So, and there's some conflict between them. Hegesippus says he was thrown off the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. Josephus said he was stoned. What they think happened was they threw him off the cliff, and the stoning afterwards was like the spear on the cross, making sure the guy that got thrown off is dead. So it's pretty wicked. James was killed. Historians still, it's a late report, but historians still accept the report that Peter was crucified upside down and that Paul was beheaded, and Nero was responsible for both their deaths. Same guy who probably started the fire in Rome, but they blamed it on the Christians. Remember we talked about Tacitus the other day. Okay, but you can say they were, so what I say is they were transformed to the point of being willing to die. Everybody's report we have, they were willing to die. And then some critic will say, what are you, a mind reader? I go, what do you mean? Can you read their minds? They were willing to die? And here's my response. No, I watch their feet. I don't read their minds. Here's how I watch their feet. Why did these guys go in the same cities that they already went in? They were beat up. Sometimes left, Paul was stoned in Lystra. Why did they go back to these towns to check on the church? Because they were willing to die for their faith. So I count their feet, not their minds. And this point is true. Nobody questions the death of the transformation of disciples. The Gospels were proclaimed very, very, very early. If I throw the whole creed thing from yesterday's lecture and a half into point 7, now you know how early this is. We have this report from the 30s, and Paul checked out not the creeds, but the data on which the creeds were based with, more about this later, but he checked it out with Peter and James in Jerusalem on the first trip, and then Peter, James, and John in the second trip. So it was preached extremely early. This message was proclaimed especially in Jerusalem first. That's going to be a knockout for the empty tomb, to show the empty tomb happened. The message was especially proclaimed in Jerusalem, where Jesus had died and was buried just a short time before. Well, you guys have phones. Just joking.
It's not the phone, it's the photographer.
I see. Oh, I get it. Some of you guys might be obsessive, a little bit obsessive, and you're trying to take your third picture. You didn't quite get the third one in. Hey, I've got a good friend, my clinical psychologist buddy, who we did that big survey on doubt, which is the topic I think they have me speaking on next summer here, on emotional doubt and how to solve the emotional aspects. But he tells me from a psychological viewpoint, if you've got a PhD or you've studied a sufficiently high amount of time to a high amount, you have probably for sure have OC tendencies. You have obsessive compulsive tendencies. And what we tease about it is that you have OC without the D. In other words, it's not a disorder, but you have an OC personality tendency. I have OC personality tendencies, because what the teaching is, you would never finish a PhD unless you had stick-to-itiveness. And if you have stick-to-itiveness, you have obsessive-compulsive traits. And usually said, if the OC does not lead to a D, OC is good. That's usually what they say in the literature. OC personality is the people who get things done. Just don't get the D, the disorder. Then you get, oh, that's okay. You get medicine, you'll be okay. So those of you who are taking pictures for the third time, we know where you're coming from. You probably have a degree in aerodynamics or something. All right, are we done?
Not the disorder.
With the pictures? Okay. I'm just teasing with you guys. Hope you know that. As a result of this teaching in Jerusalem, the Christian church was born and grew. Sunday was the primary day of worship. This is important. Over and over again in the New Testament, it says the first day of the week, or it says the third day. Those two numbers appear often in both canonical and non-canonical literature. Obviously, you can figure out what they are. Third day means third day after another reason to pick Friday, right? We're not saying that, that's scripture. So these people who think it has to be Wednesday and Thursday, that's their right. But scripture says 3 days, and that's Friday by the calendar. And a lot of them say first day of the week, and that's Sunday. But the fact that they say third day and first day points to Sunday. And the last two are also minimal facts. James, a former skeptic, converted to Christianity. Like the disciples, point 5, It also happened to James. He was converted because he also thought he had seen the risen Jesus. I told you Monday I would tell you about this when the time comes, but that little scrap we have from a gospel called the Gospel of the Hebrews, it's not an orthodox book. In fact, it tends toward Gnosticism a little bit. The early Gnosticism is like a combination of Greek philosophy and Christian teachings, and what it ended up with is heresy. And there's only fragments, there's only little fragments of it, but one of the fragments is really cool, from about 125 AD, about 30 years after the Gospel of John, so it's still respectable time-wise, and it says that Jesus saw his brother and appeared to him, and they broke bread together. Now, I don't know if that means they had a meal or if it means they had communion or Eucharist, however you say it. But he appeared to James, and they had a meal. Wouldn't you like to have been at that meeting? So cool. Family member, skeptic, very repentant, and there's his son standing there. As I often say in lectures, you don't have to watch The Chosen to get this. You might not even like The Chosen, but some people think that you can get phrases in the Gospels that show Jesus had a sense of humor. I mean, it'd be pretty hard never to be a person who never has a sense of humor. But could you imagine Jesus appearing to James and going, "Bro, it's me. I just don't believe I do. Bro, come over here. Grab this. It's healed, okay?" Oh, by the way, medical doctors believe the nails were placed here. It's unanimous. For one thing, a nail here would rip out. You go, "Well, that's not my problem. The problem is that the New Testament says he showed him his hands and his feet." That's irrelevant. You go, "What?" Well, because the Greek word for hand, we always hear 4 words for love. Their words are very specific. Hand is a Greek word that's not specific. Hand in one reference is used for up here. Hand in Greek is like appendage. And this is definitely hand in the Greek. And so medical doctors think that's where the nails went. So Jesus would have to have taken his watch off so that he could see this wound in here. But it's healed. And maybe James doesn't want to touch him like, "You look like you're hurting." "I'm not hurting, I'm healed. That's the point. I'm risen." And James becomes a believer. It's beautiful. And you know how you know that the conversion, that the gospel of the Hebrews may be correct? It's because, this is just a guess, but we're told in Mark 3, Mark 6, and John 7:5. John 7:5 says his brothers did not believe in him. Mark 3 is the mentally ill verse about Jesus. He's beside himself like a schizophrenic. But at the cross, Jesus gives his mother to John. Now, this is only, a what if. This is just possible. Why did he give his mother to John? Now, you could think of other reasons. John was the only one there, the only male there. That's one. You could say James didn't believe and he wasn't there, but he could have said, "Mom, go home and live with James." There's other reasons, but this could be the reason. Jesus wanted his mother to live with a believer, and he gives him to John. If that's true, if that supposition is the reason why, that means at the crucifixion, James still hadn't converted. Now watch this bookend. In Acts chapter 1, after Jesus ascends, Acts 1, 9 through 11, after that happens, remember the upper room? And there's about, 130 people there or something? Guess who's there? Mary and the boys. Mary and the brothers of Jesus. So James wasn't present at the cross, whether he was a believer or not at that time. There's no reason to think he was at the cross. Probably not a believer, but he's in the upper room after the ascension. It seems to be the bookends for his conversion, somewhere between Easter Sunday and right after the Ascension. James joins the faith and becomes the pastor of Jerusalem. He had a reputation, by the way, for being a man of prayer and a very, very religious person, like I don't know who would be a reputation today, like a Henry Blackaby, if you know his reputation, somebody who's always in contemplation and meditation and spending hours with the Lord privately. James, it was said, this is, could be just exaggeration, but they said his knees were like the knees of a camel with calluses because he spent so long on his knees praying. So the fellow, James, made up for his unbelief and came to the Lord, most likely in between the cross and the ascension. He becomes a Christian. Okay, and lastly, 2 to 3 years later, Paul, the church persecutor, comes just like 5 and just like 11. He comes because he also believes he saw the risen Jesus. And I've told you before, if you're going to make up a theory against the resurrection, it can't be even if there were good data, and there aren't, but even if you were going to say, oh, it's Isis and Osiris, and those stories were well known around the Mediterranean world. No, the New Testament says they saw something. Hearing someone read to you Aesop's fables, hearing a story when you're a child, or Hansel and Gretel, and there's that witch, that doesn't make you, the normal person. I know we can get mixed up, but a normal person doesn't say, I saw the witch when I was about 10 years old. I was in her. I really saw her. I was in her house. We don't talk like that unless you're mentally ill, usually. You don't say, I'm not making fun of anybody. I'm just saying, we don't say we saw. We say we heard. Mom read me that story. And notice 5, 11, and 12 are all about sight. They saw something that they said was Jesus. You can say he was a ghost and make more sense than they saw him, but they stole the story from Isis and Osiris. It's just a disconnect to say they saw something. So these are the 12. I hope I did this from memory. I hope I'm accurate here. Yes, 10:40. Ron, I'm actually 3 minutes early here. I can't believe it. When I spent whatever it was, 20 minutes on the cross, on crucifixion. But just to repeat, because we need to build on this tonight, 12 facts. Everyone agrees, pretty much everybody. Empty tombs a little less than all, and I note that here. So 12 facts, everyone agrees, and my argument goes like this. I'm going to use your 12 as a skeptic. You're a skeptical scholar, and I'll say, I'll use your 12? No, on second thought, I only need 6 of them. See, my point is to say, that's why I often call the minimal facts argument the lowest common denominator argument. If Scripture, I can't believe how many of you asked me about this translation, by the way, what this is, the Williams translation from the Greek. It's excellent. But if Williams' translation, if this book is true, New Testament, Jesus is raised from the dead, right? That's clear. If you only have the Gospels, Jesus is raised from the dead. If you only have those 7 epistles of Paul, you're not happy if you only get 7 Pauline epistles, but you get the resurrection, you get the church, you'll get everything we believe in from Paul's 7 epistles. And then I'll go, well, then can you make it with 12? Yeah, we can do it with 12 too. Can you make it with 6? Yes, I can. Let's talk about those 6. That's the minimal facts. But there's other advantages of the minimal facts. Sometimes you're on a plane, you've got a fast time to talk with somebody. You don't have time to build a reliability of the New Testament argument. You'll see the PowerPoint. It's not mine, it's my teaching assistant. He made a great PowerPoint, and as we left, he just got a contract from InterVarsity to publish that as a book on 12 arguments for the reliability of the New Testament. But usually you can't build a case for 12 arguments. You can't do that with somebody in a half hour or over coffee or even over lunch. You can get a good start in an hour, But so I reduced the case, but I am not opposed. When people say, so you do believe in inspiration, right? I'll say, do you know where I teach? I teach Liberty University. You know what kind of doctoral statement I have to sign every year? I believe in inspiration of Scripture. I believe in the New Testament's reliable. I think there are way more than 12 facts. I'm just saying with only this amount, you have the advantage. It's kind of a 4 spiritual laws done evidentially. How's that? Because in 4 spiritual laws, you can't get through everything either. The Romans road, you can't get through everything. But you're using enough to show the person that they need to come to Christ, like Romans 10:9. Great verse. And that's where I'm trying to head. It doesn't mean I question anything else in the New Testament. Just remember where I teach. And you'll see Friday that I think the New Testament is totally reliable. But the 6 facts alone can do it.